This video is going to help the user better understand how we use component display rules when we're modifying templates for a project. In this particular example, we want to introduce the concept of searching for a seam line to make our shoulder and end conditions turn off when that seam line is encountered along our project. So to begin, the first thing we want to do is to modify our template to support that particular concept. So I have a new template set up here, and if I test this template, you'll see we're going to focus on the right side that I have an end condition tying to our active surface. And so what we want to do is to support a search mechanism that, if found, can turn off this shoulder. And then if this shoulder is turned off, the subsequent components, which we will make children of that top of shoulder, will also turn off. So we want to essentially create and apply a component display rule to the top of the shoulder. This could be used typically for encountering an intersection or a driveway where you don't want to clip your main model, you just want to turn everything off outside the edge of pavement. So let's get started. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to add a null point, let's say 4 feet above our center line. And now we have our match line anchor. And I'm going to right click on that. And I'm going to add a full constraint to where we're going to be applying our profile and lock that down. Now we have to have a second point that will actually seek our match line. So we're going to do another add new component, null point. And before I do that though, I'm going to go ahead and change this name. So we'll call this looking for the right side here. So right match line seek. So right click, null point, and then I'll do an X is 0, a Y is 2, just above the pavement somewhere, it doesn't really matter. And what we want to do here is I just really want to add a vertical constraint here to our center line. We'll keep that up above the pavement, knowing that this point is going to move over and look for our seeking point. So we need to add some properties to that to do that. So what we're going to do is look for a horizontal feature constraint called match line. Now obviously this is going to need to be a linear feature in your workspace. And because we're looking to the right, let's say we want to look up to a maximum distance of 100 feet. 0 means look infinitely in both directions. A positive number means look up to that maximum distance to the right. A negative number means search up to that distance in the left direction. And so we're going to focus on the right side. We'll set that to 100 and we'll apply that. Now you can, and it's probably a good idea to, go ahead and also assign a horizontal constraint following that center line, knowing that that horizontal constraint will be overridden if it finds this particular entry. So we'll apply that as well. And so we can do a test right now. We don't expect anything to happen. If I move this point over, you can see that my shoulder stays right where it's at. So then what we want to do is to create a component display rule for the top of the shoulder. So I'm going to double click on that component, and where it says display rules here, I'm going to hit edit. And I'm going to make a new component display rule that determines when that particular shoulder top is to be drawn. So we're going to hit add, and I'll just say right shoulder display. And what we're going to do is pick our option here in terms of what we want to test. We essentially have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 possible tests. Horizontal allows us to compare the distance between two null points or 2 points on our template, which is what we want to use in this particular situation. We can even use absolute horizontal, doesn't really matter. essentially we just say if the value is greater than 0, then we know the point has moved. And so we don't want to show the shoulder. Same thing with vertical or absolute vertical. If you don't really care about the minus sign, you can use absolute. If the minus sign means something, then don't. We can also test the slope between 2 points or the absolute slope between 2 points. And we can even test to see if another component is actually displayed. And if it is, then we can display the component that we're dealing with currently. And so I'm going to just select absolute horizontal here, and I want to compare the distance between our match line anchor point and our right seek point. So there's our right match line seek, and I could have picked these points graphically too. And all I want to do is, I essentially want to say, if it's 0, I want to leave this on. If it's not 0, I want to turn it off. In other words, if it's not 0, it means it found the seek point. And so I'm just going to leave this set to 0. And we'll say OK to that. And right now when I highlight this and I hit the equal, it tells me, well, it is 0, so therefore it's true, and we want that to display. And so all I have to do is just select that rule. So I want to display that right shoulder if those 2 points are coincident. And so we'll say OK to that. And you can see now we have our display rule. One thing to point out, you can combine a series of display rules and utilize these Boolean operators to go in and say, test this rule and this rule, this and this, or this, not that. So you get the idea that you can do multiple combinations of these at any time. This is a very simple test case. So we're going to apply that. And now when we actually do a test, and so we'll test, right click, and then test point controls horizontal, you can see as soon as I come off of 0, that point then makes that come off. And so we'll turn that back, set it back to 0. But why didn't the rest of these turn off? Well, we need to make those children, and so I'm going to turn off my point names to make it a little bit easier to do that. We need to make these children of this. And so if I double click on this second component, I can assign its parent here as the top of the shoulder. So we'll apply that, and then when we come over then to test this point again, so test point control horizontal, now we have those 2 turning off. Okay. Now we can go in and individually hit each of these, or we can come over to our active template mode down here and go to our components, and we can simply drag and drop. And so on this shoulder, we're going to have essentially a child under there, and you'll see that child, which is here. And I can come in and determine where those other components are and drag those underneath. And so like if I highlight this one, all I have to do is just bring this down and drag it on top of our right shoulder surface. And now you can see it is a child. So there's that one, and then we have those 2. And then I can come over here to all of my in conditions. You can see here on the right side, and I can make those children as well just by dragging and dropping those on top of my shoulder. It just makes it a little bit easier than going and editing and selecting that manually. You can just drag and drop those to be children of that right shoulder surface. So let's go back now to our library mode, and when I right click now and test my horizontal, as soon as that point moves off of 0, everything beyond the edge of the pavement turns off, which is what we want. Now how do we actually apply that in a real design? Well, let's go take a look. So here we have a corridor shown in our 2D design in the left view and our 3D model in the right view. And I have set my active feature here to match line and made that active, and that's a feature in the examples workspace. So I'm going to go over here to task and select to create a horizontal line between 2 points. And at this point, we just put in our starting point. I can use Civil AccuDraw if I want to. And I'm just going to say 8 plus 50. And I'm going to put it right at the edge of pavement. So I'll come over here and put that at 12 feet to the right. You don't have to put it there. We seek up to 100 feet. We'll accept that. And then my ending station, I'm going to put at 9 plus 50, 12 feet right. We'll accept that. And so now we have our point. But notice how our model did not update. And that's because we still have to add this match line as a reference to the corridor for it to actually be sought. And so we come back to our corridor, and this time we're going to add a reference to our corridor, and it asks us then to pick our match line. So we'll select it, reset, and allow it to process. And you'll see how we then clipped out our corridor based on that location. And then the last thing you want to do, and I would recommend, is adding a key station right before that endpoint and right after. And so to do that, we can simply select our corridor and go over to our corridor tools here and select the create a key station. And I'm going to put in, it doesn't matter which end I start at, 9 plus 50.01, and you'll see that square up. And then our other point is going to be 8 plus 49.99. We'll accept that, and then you'll see that carry over right to the end. And we have a little bit of a tolerance flare right there, and so you can adjust that, but you get the idea. So anyway, that's how we can use that match line. And if I can come in at any point and adjust it if I needed to, but you would need to then adjust your key stations as well. And just a couple of quick things here. If I do click on my corridor, if you go back to your tools, you might want to get familiar with this icon right here, this corridor objects. And you can see right here it lists the 2 key stations that we added, and it also adds in the external reference that we added, and so at any time you can select that. The other thing to point out here is if you ever wanted to deactivate that for testing or to try to minimize the amount of processing, you can always select that icon, and then as you make changes to that reference, it won't actually process until you turn that back on. And so that icon is active essentially in every one of these except for clipping references, although it is shown in this dialog. It's not actually hooked up yet for that one, but for all these other ones it is. So it's very powerful to minimize the amount of processing time. So that is how we can utilize those component display rules to turn things on and off, and essentially by using the display rule on the shoulder, comparing the distance between these 2 points. If it's not 0, then we know we found match line, and that was assigned to our seek point, where we put in the name of the feature that we wanted to look for, and we used a positive number so that went over to the right, that maximum distance. Hopefully this helps you in better understanding how we can take advantage of component display rules.